Many of us as African Americans are unaware of the impact that we had on the creation of salsa music. The narrative has been set so entrenchedly in America and around the world that this is a music developed mainly with the exclusion of African Americans to some extent. And if we even mention in the discussion, we're only mentioned in passing as a footnote, not really having a direct relevance to the creation of the music. I'm here to set the record straight. The purpose of this video is to inform foundational Black Americans of what their ancestors have done in the past and the impact that they had in creating salsa music. Without question, had it not been for African American jazz artists, there would be no salsa music. And so what I'm going to provide for you guys is documentation, evidence that will clearly lay out the fact that African Americans had an important role in the creation of salsa music. Now, as you see, I made this Black American music tree. And if you notice that near the center to the right, I have salsa and Latin jazz. And I know for so many people, that might seem like, really? Why would he do that? That's because we did have an impact. That's one of our babies, if you will, that we helped create, along with other genres of music that we know about in America and the world. Ray Vega, he did a lecture on the history of jazz and salsa music. So I want to go there and just play a little recording of what Ray Vega said about James Reese Europe. Okay, here we go.
What happened with James Reese Europe? He had this group, and what I'm going to play you a sample of what his ensemble sounded like. And what they were doing was basically, this ensemble would perform.
Now, this is a picture of Chick Webb's band. So let me continue and see what more Ray Vega has to say.
1920s. In the 1920s, you had to go to New York, which was the center of the recording music scene. Yeah, there were recording studios in Indiana. We all know that. But the main top recording companies are based in New York City. So Mario came to perform in New York City to record in New York City with Charanga Francesa. He was a young boy. He was like 14 years old. After recording, he returned to Cuba with the aspirations of returning to New York. Now, in my conversation with Mario, he told me he was a colorful individual, short little guy, always had a cigar and always had a beer. And he would smoke and blow smoke in my face. He'd go, Vega. He never called me Ray. It was always Vega. He says, when I came to New York in the 20s, Harlem was a paradise. He was talking about Harlem. He came to New York at the height of the fabulous Harlem Renaissance. And to him, being a Black Cuban, that they were dealing with racial issues in Cuba as well. Okay, let me just tell you, they were dealing with but the reason why he was able to maneuver in white society was because he was a prodigy musician playing with the orchestra. But by and large, he knew that life was tough for Black Cubans. So when he came to New York, he saw all of these amazing musicians living in Harlem, doctors, lawyers, the whole nine yards. A lot of people from all walks, folks that had recently arrived from the Deep South during the Great Migration, folks that had been in New York already for quite some time. But it was a very diverse African-American community. And he told me, I had to come back. So his wish came true in 1930 when a band was going to come to New York City, and their trumpet player, a band from Cuba, was coming to New York City to record, and their trumpet player got sick. So Mario, who was a prolific musician as far as solfege, and anybody know what that means? It means you could sight read music, anything. You could just sight sing it. He said, you need a trumpet player? He says, I'm going to get a trumpet. I'll see you in 2 weeks. He comes back and learns all of these parts on trumpet. He wasn't a trumpet player. He was a clarinetist at that time, and bass clarinet. He comes out and he learns all of the parts to play. If anybody here saw the Buena Vista Social Club of that son cubano, that was a style of music that the band was playing. It was closer to this style. Now this is where it gets kind of crazy. It's like 1930. By 1933, he is now playing lead trumpet with Chick Webb's band. Chick Webb was the King of Swing in Harlem at the Savoy Dance Hall. That was the most important black orchestra in New York City at the time, and possibly in black big band music at the time. So he went from playing this type of stuff. Well, hold on to your ears. Listen to this thing. Okay, now this is now Mario playing lead trumpet with the Chick Webb Orchestra. Wait a minute. That was in 33. By 1938, he winds up joining the Cab Calloway Orchestra. He was the one that, Mario played a big role in several situations. He was the one who helped to discover Ella Fitzgerald to get her as a member of the Chick Webb Orchestra. And as a member of the Cab Calloway Orchestra, he befriended the great trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie.
All right, so that's a little bit about the history regarding the impact. Let me go to another recording. This is from the Palladium documentary. And the narrator is going to talk about some of the conversations that Mario Bauza had with Chick Webb and how he was going to help him develop his sound. Let's play that.
Long for Mario's raw talent to be recognized. In 1932, he auditioned for drummer Chick Webb's big band, recognized among aficionados as the hottest band in New York.
Mario said, Chick Webb told him, listen, man, you got what I need, and I got what you need. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, you play very well, beautiful sound, beautiful intonation, but you don't phrase the music like a black musician does. I gotta teach you how to phrase and speak like a black musician does on the horn. And that's what I can give you. And what you can give me is your beautiful tone, your beautiful lead sound. And not only will you be the lead trumpet player, but you will be the musical director of this band.
What is significant is what happened and who he was sitting next to in the trumpet section, which would change the course of Latin jazz history. It was Dizzy Gillespie.
Beyond musical director, Mario was a mentor, especially to Dizzy Gillespie, a young trumpeter intrigued by Mario's musical heritage. Dizzy was jazzed when Mario pushed the band towards Latin arrangements, while Cab flirted with the rhythm, but considered them novelty tunes.
They would ask, hey, Mario, what's the music of your country like? And so he plays them some records of authentic Cuban music in the song tradition. And they started laughing at it and going, hey, that sounds like hillbilly music. Country music. Yes, the country music of my country, Cuba. And, he makes a prophetic statement. You know something? One day, there's going to be an orchestra that's on the same level musically as this orchestra, the Cab Calloway Orchestra, and every great big band that's here in the United States. That's the inspiration.
Okay, let me stop it right there. Now, we have to keep in mind that during the 30s, or at least the late 20s, 30s, and 40s, there was a lot of traveling with Cuban musicians who would come to record. Some would stay in New York and play with these bands. They would take what they learned, go to Cuba, set up their own orchestras in Cuba. So when you see video of the bands and the orchestras in Cuba, keep in mind, those arrangements or those particular ensembles did not exist prior to the time Cubans were coming to America. Everything that those Cubans learned, they learned from American jazz artists. So it was never the other way around. It was never the Cubans teaching Americans how to put together an orchestra. It was the opposite. I gave you an example of James Reese Europe. Back in the early 1900s, before World War I, he had these kind of orchestras already set up. Cuba wasn't doing nothing, was not on that level. And I'm going to play you later, before I end this video, what was going on in the 1920s, what the music sounded like. It sounded nothing like it does now. And that's because of the influence of African Americans on the Sun Band, or Afro-Cuban music. Okay, give me 1 second while I make sure where we are here.
Point. So by 38, he's a member of the Cab Calloway band. In 1941, he decides that he's going to make a bit of a switch, and he decides that he's going to put together a band that will be just like an American big band. The trumpets, the saxophones, playing and arranging techniques that are used in an American big band. But the entire rhythm section is going to be Latin guys. So it's going to be like big band style with the percussionist playing an Afro-Caribbean thing. And the band was called Machito and his Afro-Cubans. They wound up calling it that. His brother-in-law was Frank Machito Grillo, and he was a singer from Cuba. And they put together a group called Machito and his Afro-Cubans. Now, that's a funny thing because it wasn't really Afro-Cubans. There were a couple of Afro-Cubans in the band, but the band was made up of African-Americans. The rhythm section was mostly Puerto Rican. It was an interesting mix of African-Americans and Latinos from different places all together, really playing now what is going to be considered a very new style of music. And this is the Machito and his Afro-Cubans. Now, I'm going to play a couple of different things. This band, they were very intelligent because they were using the sounds of... When you heard the band, it was like, wow, you're hearing an American big band. But they're not swinging like ding, 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 they're not... It's a different thing. It's a Latin thing. And it became an incredibly popular sound. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to a couple of different sounds of the band. What would be considered kind of a salsa thing in this day and age. So it's a real fun sound. He had the great Graciela as a vocalist in the band.
All right, let me stop it right there. I just want to make a few points here. Now, you can see when Chick Webb brought Mario into his group, he was under his tutelage for at least 10 years, studying to be able to form a band like the Machito and the Afro-Cuban Orchestra. So that in itself tells you the influence that African Americans has had on him to create a new music. Again, another example of a 50-50 collaboration that created salsa music. But in the history books, and when you hear people talk about the development of salsa music, you rarely hear it told in that way. African Americans' participation in salsa music is but a footnote in salsa music history. Even you heard Ray Vega even mention that the band was comprised of African Americans. I personally wonder, was that part of the transition, before they got other musicians who were of Hispanic origins to fill in? I don't know. But the fact that there were African Americans in the original Machito band is interesting because you don't hear that. And props to Ray Vega for telling the truth about what the makeup or the composition of the group truly was. All right, so let's move on here. Okay, now this is interesting. Now, this is a gentleman you will find on YouTube. And so I was doing my research. I was trying to figure out, okay, how do Latinos tell the story of salsa music? So he has a series of episodes called What is Salsa? And he has 3 parts. In all 3 parts, he doesn't really deal with the African-American contribution in salsa music. And so I said to myself, you know what, let me just ask him a question in the comments and see if he would respond to the question that I have for him. So let me show you the question. And if you go on YouTube, go to his channel, and you'll see my question and his answers, okay? Because I figure he must be an expert. His channel is called Salsa Goals. So he must be some kind of expert on salsa music. So let me go to my question, and then I'll show you his answer. My question: although many communities contribute to the development of salsa, would you agree that the collaboration between Afro-Cubans and African-American jazz musicians laid the foundation from which salsa was born? The question is clear, okay? So now here's his answer. Great comment, and thanks for asking or mentioning that. I agree 100% that African-American jazz played a major role in the development of salsa as shown in my videos. To the best of my understanding, the main foundation was Afro-Cuban music, especially the son montuno. However, contemporary jazz was added to the template, thereby making the arrangements and harmonies and melodies more intricate and complex than they've been traditionally. The influence of jazz is one of the main things that, for me, distinguishes modern salsa from traditional Afro-Cuban music. So here you go. You have an independent, I would say an expert, saying that it's really a 50-50 thing. So when Fat Joe talks about hip-hop being 50-50, he can't come close to the receipts I'm providing in this video. Time and time again through the course of this video, and I'm not even finished, I'm demonstrating that salsa is a 50-50 collaboration. Okay, so let's move into what happened to salsa music. And let's do this. Let's play this.
Now, these Afro-Cuban rhythms quickly became popular all over the world during the first half of the 20th century. And starting around the year 1948, Cuban rhythms such as mambo, cha-cha-cha, and pachanga became extremely popular dance crazes in the United States, particularly at venues like the Palladium Ballroom in New York City. And with that, the musical foundation for what would come to be known as salsa was already under construction. But then, something happened that changed everything. What was it? How did this event change everything? And how did the music come to be called salsa? Well, stay tuned for the next video to find out.
All right. So that's part of the history here. Now, what's interesting is that had it not been for the Cuban or crisis or the revolution, this music would still be in the hands of Cubans. And so the only reason why we associate the music with Puerto Ricans, because they were already playing the music. And so they basically just took it over, you know, not in a mean-spirited way. They carried on what they enjoyed, showcased it around the world, and changed the name to salsa. And now everyone associates that music with Puerto Ricans, when in fact, they didn't create the music. The people who created the music was African Americans and Cubans and Afro-Cubans. They created what we know today as salsa. What they created was called Latin jazz in a sense, or Afro-Cuban jazz. But what happened was, after the embargo, not the embargo, but after the revolution, that name was changed to salsa. So now we identify salsa with Puerto Rico. Now they added their flavor to it, no question about it. Probably made it more livelier. I'm not certain about that. You know, I'm sure they added the plane and the bamba to the artistic, development of the music, but they weren't part of the creative process in the beginning. And that's important to note because that's the real history behind that. All right. So let me do this. Let me go here. Okay. Now we're going to delve into a little bit of the history, how early African Americans have been into providing the country, United States, the awareness of what was going on in the West, not the Western world, but the Caribbean countries like, Puerto Rico, countries like Cuba, countries like Panama, and what have you. Okay, so this person is very important. She's featured on the thumbnail. Okay, her name is Miss Ada Overton Walker. Okay, let me zoom out and get you guys get a better look at her. Vaudeville actress or musician, what have you. Now I'm gonna go into an area called, I got a lot of good information from this website, salsaforums.com. And so the question I asked this website was, what were the contributions of African Americans in salsa music? And so this is some of the information that I received. So I'm gonna read a little bit of that for you guys, okay? Now, this is the person who responds to the question in a sense. He says, this is a subject close to my heart, and I was knee deep in it for years. The story of African American contributions to Afro-Cuban music is basically the chronology of jazz itself. Wherever popular music could be found interpreted by African Americans, Afro-Cuban music figured into the repertoire in some fashion. This goes back to the 1890s with early vaudeville touring ensembles, the most prominent being William and Walker and Nicole and Johnson. Dance is how the mainstream becomes hip to the music. That blanket statement, these early cats were exposed to such cultures in their travels, and their dance artists within the troupe would attempt to emulate it. Pioneers such as the legendary Ada Overton Walker, who launched the Puerto Rico Girls. None of them were Puerto Rican, but all African-American West Indian. In fact, West Indians were the black community that gave rise to much of the awareness of Afro-Cuban Caribbean music expression among black culture in the United States. That allowed for a smoother transition for Afro-Cuban, Afro-Panamanian, Afro-Boricua, Afro-Dominican, and other practitioners who immigrated to the U.S. to find place for themselves behind and contributed to the development of the music further. Okay, so it was these early vaudeville acts who brought the attention of what was going on there to help bring awareness to cultures outside the United States. So this is how instrumental a lot of African Americans were earlier to bring new things to the United States. I'm going to read on. As far as specific contributions go, Franklin Newton, an African-American trumpeter, was among the first of anyone. He may have been the first to feature a tambadora, what is commonly regarded as the conga, into the modern large orchestra in the 1940s. This was prior to any Latin American orchestra who interpret Afro-Cuban music, who don't begin to commonly feature a tambadora in the large orchestra until about 1943-1944. Both the U.S., Mexico, and Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Dominican Republic, every large orchestra patterned itself after the North American U.S. bands. To a certain degree, we can directly credit an African American for this in the form of Fletcher Henderson, we talked about him earlier, who launched the first multi-trumpet, multiple sax orchestration in popular music. This is not only the model for every orchestra that makes up the 1930s and 40s era for jazz, but its impact was also felt throughout the Caribbean and South America. Now, you remember when I talked about what you see in Cuba in terms of the orchestras did not start in Cuba. There were influences from America. So we got to get the history right. I know we want to feel good about our history, but let's get the history right. Now, I'm also not trying to suggest that the conga was an African American creation. It was definitely brought up by or created by Cubans in Cuba. So I'm not saying that. I'm saying, however, it was introduced into the swing bands first because the swing bands thought that or felt that Afro-Cuban music was more of a novelty. So they played around with the instruments. So they introduced those instruments to the American public first. That's the point I'm making. I also found an interesting article online called The Untold History of Swing. So I'm going to read an excerpt of that to largely confirm the idea that the conga was introduced to swing bands first before it was ever introduced into Latin American or Afro-Cuban jazz or Latin American bands. Okay. Afro-Cuban musicians such as Mario Bauza, Tito Puente, Chano Panzo led the development of jazz-style swing music with Latin instruments. They primarily relied on percussion instruments like the maracas, the clave, even the conga drum to highlight their rhythm, nature, and their ground. According to reporting of the Stanford Live big band orchestras incorporating these Latin rhythms into their sound, the dances like the marimba and the conga became a part of the swing music as well. By the close of the 1930s, the Afro-Cuban style of swing music moved off into its own direction. Afro-Cuban jazz solidified its own sound, starting with Bauza's Tanga, composed in 1943, which would inspire more Afro-Cuban jazz and swing music started to fade after it started to fade. So this confirms the idea that the conga and other Latin instruments were featured first in swing band music. So although I couldn't find information that said that Frankie Newton was the guy, I did find information to corroborate the idea that the conga started there first. Now let me show you an example of that, and I'm going to give you an example of why that is true. Now this is an interesting piece of paper. I got this is a PDF I found online, and we're going to talk about this real quick. Let me bring it up a little bit so you guys can read it. Here we go. This is what it reads. Salsa was created with American jazz combined with Cuban sun. The very first sentence says 50-50. The very first sentence, 50-50. This happened from around 1930 when thousands of Cubans migrated to New York. The Cuban economy was not doing well, and as Cuba had become part of America, it was easy for Cubans to travel between the two countries. Son is a dance style that was created when the Spanish colonized Cuba, then brought African slaves there to work on the sugar plantations. Over the years, the Spanish and the African cultures fused and son was born. American style jazz was born in New Orleans from the combining of swing rhythms and portamento vocal slides techniques of the blues, the instruments of the military marching bands, drum, brass instruments, and the syncopated melodies of ragtime, a style of piano music example, the entertainer. New Orleans was a port town which provided lots of clubs and entertainment for the sailors when they docked. So there were lots of jobs for all kinds of musicians. Okay, now here you have features of traditional sun bands that are found in modern salsa bands, and then on the right you have features of traditional swing bands that are found in salsa bands. Okay, let's do this. And we're going to go through this. Now, as you can see, whatever is underlined are the instruments that are used in salsa music today. So under the sun bands, you have the drums, the bongo drums, the maracas, the griot, the clave. Now keep in mind, in early Afro-Cuban music, it was the bongos featured. It wasn't the congas. We got to keep that in mind. I'm going to show you an example of that later. So these are the instruments, primarily the guitar, the double bass, the type of rhythm, syncopated. Now you look on the swing band side, you see what instruments were contributed to salsa music. And look to your right, on the front line, you see conga on the swing band side, not on the sun side. And that's because it goes back to what I was telling you about before. It first appeared in swing music, in American jazz music, not Afro-Cuban music, although the instrument is created in Cuba. So I want you guys to be clear. I'm not saying it was created in America. It is definitely a Cuban instrument, but it doesn't come out of the traditional son music. That's my point. All right, so you see the conga, the trumpets, riffs, and you got the bass, piano, drum kit, syncopated, walking bass. Now, the piano is also from American jazz. Okay? So what you hear in salsa music is embedded with African American influences. It's unescapable. So I just want you guys to understand the history of what we're talking about. Give credit to the people who put in the work. That's what should be done. But this is a way, in my opinion, this is my opinion here. This is what they don't want everybody to know the enormous impact that African Americans have had on the creation of salsa music. We got to understand this. Salsa music was pretty much created in the 40s. Ray Vega said so. So what you have now is just, a continuation of what happened in the 40s. So even though Puerto Ricans did a lot in the music, they were really never a part of the creative process. So 50-50 really goes to Cubans and African Americans. All right. So let me play this now. I'm going to play for you. First of all, what I want to do is play for you what Cuban music sounded like in the 20s. And remember when I played James Reese Europe's music in the early 1900s, the type of sophistication that was there. It was nowhere like that in Cuba. So in essence, the Cubans had a lot to learn from African Americans, a lot to learn. We were so much ahead in terms of technical expertise. We were so far advanced. So let me play what was going on in Cuba in 1920. All right, I just want to basically make a point that, what was really happening in Cuba was nothing on the scale of what was happening in the United States. So when we talk about the advancement of the music, the technical aspect of the music, clearly African Americans were hands down amongst the best musicians in the world. So now the last video I'm going to play is of Celia Cruz talk about how she feels about the name change of Afro-Cuban music or son music, son mutuno or son cubano to salsa music. Here we go.
I began to make record with Sonora Matancera in 1951. And my first record was the hit in Cuba.
It's coming up. She's pretty.
But I left Cuba because I don't like the government in Cuba. I don't like the communism. And at that time, I knew that my music have another name, salsa. So I went into the salsa. But salsa is not a new rhythm. It's the Cuban music with a new name.
There we go. That's what I'm saying. So salsa is just a renaming of an old music that was created by African Americans and Afro-Cubans. So that is the history. That is my interpretation of the history of salsa music. I'm all about getting the record straight, getting the history right. This is not an attack on Puerto Ricans, but I want them to understand that I'm not going to allow you guys to try to take credit for a culture that you had nothing to do with creating. I'm not going to allow you guys to do that. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do in this video is basically demonstrate what 50-50 looks like. What you present as 50-50 or a major contribution to hip hop is nothing more than participation. Your proximity to black folks does not mean that you are creators of a culture. You just so happen to live next to us. That's it. And you observed and you learned and you participated. Many of my videos deal with that in more detail. If this is the first time you ever watching one of my videos, please go back. I have a series of videos dealing with this topic. I try to break it down as best as I can in order to demonstrate that hip hop comes from Black culture, period. No other culture is involved in creating hip hop but Black culture. So if you have any questions regarding anything I said in this video, do not hesitate to send me a comment. I'm going to put as many links and videos in the description. There's so many. I'm not going to spend hours, not hours, but at least I'll probably have to spend about an hour and a half to do it. And so what I will do, I will load some in, maybe about 4 or 5. If those sources don't answer your question, hit me up in the comments. I'll drop that particular source in the description, because if you have a question, maybe other people may have the same question, and therefore I don't have to continue to answer that particular question. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Definitely like the video. Please share the video, because it's so important for us as FBAs to understand our total history. So much of our history is not known, and you have to dig deep in order to find it. Because if you allow other people to write our history, they'll write you out. And Puerto Ricans have been successful to a large degree of writing us out of the history. And so it's been so successful that no one even thinks about Black Americans when it comes to salsa music. And many Black people don't even think about Black Americans. That's how successful this campaign has been. So I'm here, like I said, I could care less if I don't influence not one Hispanic about the information that I produce. I backed up everything I said, no question. If you doubt my information is incorrect, make your own video, all right? Make a video saying that I was wrong about this. And if I am wrong, I have no problem correcting it. But I don't think I'm wrong in this case, because I make sure I documented, I crossed my T's, I dotted my I's. I'm pretty confident in what I'm presenting in this video today. So with that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, a great weekend. I look forward to your responses in the comment section, and you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll be back at it with another one soon. All right, talk to you guys later. I'm out.